My friend went missing in Joshua Tree National Park. His last voicemail is a warning. Welcome to the Wilderness Protocol. We mark the wilderness with trails, with signs, with designated campsites. We draw lines on a map and pretend that we understand the space within those lines. We believe our rules apply there. But the desert is different. It doesn't have the deep, dark woods to hide its secrets. It hides them in plain sight, in the heat haze that warps the horizon, in the silence between gusts of wind, in the impossible geometry of the rocks. My name is Alex, and I am submitting this report because the official one is a lie. The official report says my best friend, Ben, died of dehydration after getting lost in Joshua Tree National Park. But I have his phone. I have his last recording, and I know the truth. The desert didn't take him. He was given away. And his last message, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a warning. Ben and I were opposites, two sides of the same worn coin. He was an artist, a photographer who found his muse in the chaotic, vibrant, and relentless noise of the city. His lens captured the beauty and grit, the lonely reflection in a rain-slick puddle, the intricate web of cracks on an old brick wall, the ghost of a smile on a stranger's face in a crowded subway car. He thrived on the energy, the constant thrum of human life. I, on the other hand, was an engineer. My world was one of numbers, of quiet logic, of finding elegant solutions to complex but definable problems. So when he called me on a Tuesday and announced he was going to Joshua Tree for a week, alone, I was more than just surprised. I was concerned. Joshua Tree? I'd said, the phone pressed to my ear as I stared at a blueprint on my screen. Then you consider a power outage a hostile wilderness event. What are you going to do out there? He'd laughed, but it was a thin, brittle sound, not his usual booming laugh. That's the point, Alex. It's too loud here. Not just the city. My head. It's just full of noise. I need to get away from it all. I need to find a place where I can actually hear myself think. Or maybe not think at all. I want to see the stars you're always talking about. He was going through a bad breakup, the kind that hollows a person out, and I knew better than to argue. Maybe the desert was what he needed. A clean slate. A vast, empty canvas. I helped him prepare, a process that felt more like planning a mission to Mars. I forced him to buy a proper pack, a water filter, and a personal locator beacon. I drew circles on a park map, showing him the well-traveled trails, the ranger stations, the areas with the best chance of a cell signal. I made him promise, a real solemn promise, to check in every single day. I promise, he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. Don't worry. What's the worst that could happen? For the first 3 days he kept that promise. The texts would come in the evenings, when he'd driven to the edge of the park to catch a signal. They were filled with a sense of wonder that was so purely Ben. He sent photos that were, even for him, breathtaking. A single twisted Joshua tree silhouetted against a sky that looked like a violent, beautiful bruise of purple, orange, and pink. A time-lapse of the stars wheeling across the vast, dark expanse, so clear and numerous they looked like a spill of luminous dust. His messages were full of a newfound peace. Day 1, you were right. The quiet out here is something else. It's not empty. Feels full. Like it's listening. Day 2, I haven't spoken a word out loud in 24 hours. It feels strange. Good strange. I think my brain is finally starting to slow down. Day 3, found a place today that felt older than the rest of it. The rocks feel different. The air is stiller. It feels like the heart of the quiet. Going to explore it more tomorrow. His last message arrived on Thursday evening at 7:14 p.m. It was a photograph. The image was of a massive granite boulder, a perfect monolith rising from the desert floor. It was split cleanly down the middle, a dark, narrow fissure that looked for all the world like a doorway. The rock itself seemed to absorb the light, making the shadows within the gap look unnaturally dark. His caption was simple and, in retrospect, chilling. Found a door. I felt a sudden, inexplicable shiver. I texted back immediately. Looks incredible. But listen to your engineer friend, don't go in. Geological formations can be unstable. It was a lame, practical joke, but it was my way of saying be careful. He never replied. I didn't panic. Not at first. The park was huge, the signal was a ghost. I told myself he was just out of range, fully immersed in the quiet he'd been seeking. I went to bed expecting a barrage of photos in the morning. But Friday came and went with only silence on the line. Then Saturday. The quiet I had encouraged him to find was now my enemy. It was a blank wall I was screaming against. By Sunday morning, the dread was a physical thing, a cold, heavy weight in my stomach. I called his phone. Straight to voicemail, the same cheerful, ironic message he'd recorded months ago, now a cruel mockery. I called the Joshua Tree National Park dispatch. The woman who answered was calm, professional. Her voice practiced in the art of soothing the frantic relatives of the lost. I gave her Ben's name, his car's description, his last known location based on the photo. The official search began within hours. I couldn't stay in my apartment. The silence there was now echoing the silence from the desert. I drove the 2 hours to the park, the landscape outside my car window transforming from the familiar geometry of the city to the alien, hostile beauty of the desert. I established a grim routine at a dusty motel in 29 Palms. Each morning, I would drive to the makeshift incident command post at the Split Rock trailhead, where Ben's car had been found, exactly as expected. I would sit on the tailgate of my truck, drinking lukewarm coffee, watching the search and rescue teams, all crisp uniforms, radios, and professional competence fan out into the vast, indifferent landscape. They were looking for a man. I was looking for my friend. The distinction felt important. Their search was methodical, a grid-by-grid sweep. They were looking for the expected signs of a lost hiker. A footprint, a piece of clothing, a dropped water bottle. But for 2 days they found nothing. It was as if Ben had sent that final text and then simply been erased from the earth. The rangers were polite to me, but I could see the pity in their eyes, the slow, sad certainty that this was turning from a rescue into a recovery. The lead ranger was a man named Cutler. He was tall, weathered, with a quiet authority that came from years of dealing with the unforgiving nature of this place. On the second evening, he came over to my truck. "Mr. Vance," he began, his voice gentle. "I need to ask, was he in any kind of emotional distress? Was he having any personal problems?" "He was going through a breakup," I said, the words tasting like a betrayal. "But he wasn't. Not like that. He wasn't reckless. He was just looking for some peace and quiet." Cutler nodded slowly, his gaze drifting towards the colossal, silent rock formations. "This desert, it offers a lot of quiet," he said, his voice distant. "Sometimes it offers more than people bargain for. Sometimes people come out here looking for an escape, and they find one that's a little too permanent." He was telling me in his own way to prepare for the worst. The discovery came on the morning of the third day. A drone operator scanning a remote, inaccessible cluster of rock monoliths several miles off the main trail spotted a patch of color that didn't belong. A small blue shape, wedged at the base of a towering, finger-like rock the maps called the Observer. I was at the command post when the ground team radioed in. "I see, this is Search Team Bravo. We have located the subject's backpack." "Repeat, we have the backpack." A wave of dizzying, contradictory emotions washed over me. Relief because it was a sign. Terror because a lost hiker never, ever abandons their pack. It is their lifeline. They brought it back an hour later. It was Ben's pack, no doubt. It was dusty but undamaged. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists as Cutler carefully unzipped the main compartment. It was a tableau of a tragedy foretold. His emergency water bladder was still more than half full. His supply of protein bars was untouched. His first aid kit was pristine. And the personal locator beacon I had forced him to buy sat at the bottom, silent, its activation switch untouched. Whatever had happened to Ben, he had not been lost in the traditional sense. He had not fought for survival. It seemed he had simply walked away from it. Then from a side pocket, Cutler pulled out Ben's phone. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "The battery's dead," he said. "We'll take it back to the lab, see if we can pull any GPS data from it. It might give us a more precise search area." "Let me take it," I said, my voice hoarse. "Please. I have his charger. I can do it faster." Maybe he sent a message that didn't go through. Cutler hesitated for a long moment, a debate playing out behind his stoic eyes. He was weighing protocol against human decency. Decency, to my surprise, won. He handed me the phone. "Call me the second you find anything," he said. "Anything at all." I drove back to my motel in a haze. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand, like a black box recovered from a wreckage. The air-conditioned chill of the room felt like a violation after the oppressive heat of the desert. I plugged the phone into the wall, the small click of the charger seeming to echo like a gunshot in the silent room. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the screen. I watched as the battery symbol appeared, empty and stark. I watched as, after an eternity, the first sliver of green appeared. I watched as the phone, with a soft chime that made me jump, finally powered on. Ben's face smiled at me from the lock screen, a picture I had taken of him months ago, laughing in a crowded bar. The noise and life in the photo felt like it was from another universe. My fingers felt thick and clumsy as I swiped it open. I checked his texts first. Nothing new. His photo gallery. The last picture was the one of Split Rock. Nothing after. My heart sank. And then I saw the icon. The small red circle on the phone app. One new voicemail. It was a call that had never appeared on my own phone's log. A message that had been left for him but had never reached the outside world. A ghost in the machine. My breath hitched. My hand trembled as I navigated to the voicemail screen. It was there. A single message received Thursday, 7:48 p.m. 34 minutes after he had sent me the photo of the door. I pressed play and put the phone on speaker. The cheap motel speaker crackled, and for a moment there was only the sound of hissing static. A sound like wind blowing over a million years of sand. And then I heard my best friend's voice and the world fell away. He was whispering. A raw, ragged, terrified whisper, the sound of a man trying to make himself so small that even the air wouldn't notice him. "Alex," he breathed, the sound so intimate and so full of fear it was like he was in the room with me. "Alex, if you get this, if this ever reaches you, don't come looking for me. Do you hear me? Do not come looking." A long, agonizing pause filled only with the sound of his ragged, shallow breaths and that strange, pervasive static. "I went through the door, man," he continued, his voice breaking on a half-sob. "The rock. Split Rock. It's not just a rock formation. It's a listening post. I don't know how else to describe it. They listen to the quiet. They've been here forever. They're made of the silence. Made of the space between the grains of sand." Another pause. I leaned closer to the phone, straining to hear. In the background, under the static, there was another sound now. A low, deep, humming vibration. It was a sound that seemed to resonate with the very bones of my skull. They don't have faces, Alex," Ben's whisper became more frantic, more desperate. "But they wear them. They can pull them from you. From your memories. They showed me. They reached into my head and they showed me my grandfather's face. From when I was 5. He was smiling at me, Alex, just like he used to. But it wasn't him. The eyes were just holes. They were just holes full of stars." The humming in the background grew louder, more insistent. "I made a mistake," he cried, the sound now a choked, terrified whimper. "They said they liked the quiet I was looking for. They offered me a trade. The real quiet, they called it. The quiet in my head. All they wanted in return was a story. A memory. I thought it was a fair trade. I gave them one. The day I first learned to ride a bike. A happy memory. But they liked it. They said it was flavorful. They want more, Alex. They want all of them." His breathing was frantic now, a panicked panting. "They're called the listeners," he whispered, his voice dropping so low I could barely hear it. Don't say their name out loud. They can hear the vibrations. In the air. In the rock. Oh God, they're coming back. I can feel them listening. I have to go quiet. I have to think quiet thoughts. The silence is the only place they can't find you if you don't think too loud. His voice was a desperate, final plea. Don't come here, Alex. The desert isn't empty. It's a trap. It's so full. The humming in the background suddenly intensified, rising in pitch until it was a low, guttural, grinding roar. And then, through the static, a new voice spoke. It was not human. It was a voice made of ancient stone and dry wind. It was a voice of absolute authority. And it spoke a single, clear, and terrible word. Found. The line went dead. The voicemail ended. And I was left alone in the buzzing silence of a cheap motel room, with the last words of my best friend echoing in a world that no longer made any sense. Ranger Cutler's face was a carefully constructed mask of professional sympathy. I played him the voicemail in the stark, morning light of the incident command post. He listened to the entire recording in silence, his expression unreadable. The hissing static, Ben's terrified whispers, the final, grinding sound in that single, terrible word, found. It all played out in the mundane, orderly environment of their command tent, a transmission from another reality. When it was over, Cutler was silent for a long time. He took off his wide-brimmed hat and wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, though the morning was still cool. Son, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. Your friend was clearly in a state of extreme distress. The desert, it's a powerful place. The heat, the dehydration, the sheer sensory deprivation, it can cause vivid auditory and visual hallucinations. It can make a man believe he's seeing things that aren't there. He wasn't hallucinating, I said, my voice low and tight. He was describing something. A place. A process. He was describing a paranoid delusion brought on by extreme environmental stress, Cutler countered, his professional mask slipping back into place. This recording is a tragedy. It is the sound of a mind coming apart. It is valuable to us as a psychological marker, but as a navigational tool? As a factual account? It's meaningless. He was building a wall between us. A wall of procedure and plausible deniability. He was taking Ben's terror and filing it away in a folder marked psychological event. In that moment, I knew I was alone in this. Their search was for a body. My search was for the thing that had taken my friend's stories. We were no longer on the same mission. I knew I couldn't go back to the city. I couldn't live my life of quiet logic, knowing what I now knew. To do so would be a betrayal of Ben's final, desperate warning. His message wasn't just a cry of fear. It was a set of clues. Split rock. The door. The listeners. The quiet. It was a map. I made a choice. I lied to Cutler. I told him he was right, that I was emotional, that I needed to go home and grieve. I saw the relief in his eyes. I was a problem he no longer had to manage. I didn't go home. I went to the nearest town and began my own mission preparation. I am an engineer. I approach problems methodically. Ben had been an artist, approaching the desert with a sense of wonder. I would approach it as a hostile environment, home to an unknown and intelligent entity. I bought a new pack, a better water filtration system, high-energy rations, and a military-grade compass. And I bought a small, powerful audio recorder with a highly sensitive directional microphone. If this place was defined by silence and sound, I would need a way to measure it. Under the cover of pre-dawn darkness 2 days later, I drove my truck not to the main Split Rock trailhead, but to a remote, unmarked dirt road a few miles away. I hid the truck in a dry wash, camouflaging it with a tarp and brush. I would not be found until I was ready to be. Then, with the first pale light of dawn painting the eastern sky, I began my walk towards Split Rock, my own personal ground zero. The desert at dawn is a world of stark beauty and profound indifference. The Joshua trees, which Ben had seen as beautiful, now looked to me like strange, silent sentinels, their bristling arms a warning. The colossal rock formations were not just geological wonders. They were monuments to a silence that had reigned for eons, a silence that had swallowed my friend whole. I found Split Rock easily. It was even more imposing in person. A perfect, granite sphere, 30 feet high, cleaved in two. The fissure the door was a slice of absolute shadow in the morning light. I stood before it, the audio recorder in my hand, and I thought of Ben's words, "It's a listening post." I turned on the recorder. The digital display showed the ambient noise level at a low, steady hum, the sound of the distant wind, the faint buzz of insects. I took a deep breath and I stepped into the gap. The change was instantaneous and profound. The temperature dropped by at least 20 degrees. The world outside, the sound of the wind, vanished completely. The digital display on my recorder plummeted. The decibel level dropped to a single, stark digit, 0. It was not quiet. It was a total, perfect, and scientifically impossible absence of sound. The walls of the passage were cool and smooth to the touch, almost like polished obsidian. And they were covered in the petroglyphs I had seen in Ben's photos. Spirals, labyrinths, and that endlessly repeating symbol of a stylized human ear. I ran my fingers over one. The rock seemed to vibrate, to hum with the low, latent energy. I was not in a rock formation. I was inside an instrument. I walked the length of the passage, a 50-foot journey through an acoustic dead zone. When I stepped out the other side, sound rushed back in a dizzying flood. I was standing in a hidden canyon, a perfect bowl of white sand and towering rock walls. This was the place Ben had found. The heart of the quiet. There were no footprints. The wind, which I could now hear sighing over the canyon rim, did not seem to touch the sand at my feet. The air was still, and it hummed with that same low, resonant frequency from the voicemail. It was the sound of the place itself, the sound of the listeners. I began to walk, following the curve of the canyon wall. My plan was to retrace Ben's steps, to find the place where he had left his sketchbook. I moved slowly, my recorder held out in front of me like a divining rod. For the most part, the ambient hum remained low and steady. But as I passed certain rock formations once that were pocked with small dark holes, like porous bone, the hum would spike, and the recorder would pick up faint, whispered fragments of sound. They weren't words. They were impressions. A ghost of a laugh. The sigh of a man in pain. The first cry of a newborn. It was as if the rocks themselves were dreaming, leaking the residue of the stories they had consumed. This whole canyon was the library of stolen memories. It was mid-afternoon when I found the great Joshua tree. It stood in the center of a wide circular plaza of rock, its branches a twisted, supplicating prayer to the empty sky. And at its base, just as I had hoped and feared, were the offerings. The prospector's pickaxe, the child's shoe, the spinning compass, and Ben's sketchbook. I approached with extreme caution. The hum around the tree was noticeably louder, a deep thrumming that I could feel in my solar plexus. I picked up the sketchbook. It felt cold, inert. All the life, all the memory had been drained from it. I sat down, my back against a warm boulder, and I opened the book to the last drawing. The horrifying self-portrait. The black, empty eyes. The too wide smile. And the inscription, "They taught me how to listen. Now I can't hear anything else." As I stared at the drawing, a shadow fell across the page. My head snapped up. The sun was high and bright. There was nothing between it and me. But the shadow was there. Tall, thin, and impossibly sharp. I didn't turn around. My heart was a frantic drum, a loud, panicked noise in this quiet place. I remembered Ben's warning, "Don't think too loud." I squeezed my eyes shut. I focused on my breathing. Inhale, exhale. I tried to make my mind a placid lake, a smooth, silent surface. I tried to become part of the quiet. A dry, rustling whisper appeared in my mind. It was the voice from the voicemail. "Another noisy one has come." I didn't react. I focused on my breathing, on the silence. "This one is different from the artist," the voice continued. "The artist was full of sad, beautiful colors. You are full of sharp edges, of numbers and lines, a less pleasing taste, but a new one." A long, thin, shrouded finger entered my peripheral vision. It hovered over the self-portrait in the sketchbook on my lap. I felt that same strange pulling sensation I'd experienced before. A memory crisp and clear. Ben and I years ago sitting on a park bench, him sketching me, both of us laughing. The memory was bright, warm, and full of life. And then the listener in my mind tasted it. Ah, the voice whispered, a sound of curious satisfaction. This one's story is tied to the artist's. A shared narrative. That is efficient. The finger retracted. I dared to open my eyes. The shadow was gone. I let out a shuddering breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. It had been there. A listener. And it had tasted my memory. It knew my connection to Ben. I had to get out. My mission was no longer to understand. It was to survive. I stood up, leaving the sketchbook where it lay, a hollowed-out husk. I turned to leave the clearing. And then I saw it. What my panicked mind had not registered before. The offerings at the base of the tree were not just random objects. They were arranged in a pattern. A precise geometric spiral with the child's shoe at the center, and Ben's sketchbook at the outermost edge. And I saw that the ground around the tree was not natural. The sand and rock had been swept and carved with incredibly precise lines, forming a complex, interlocking pattern of spirals and angles that all led outward from the tree like a massive, unholy circuit board etched into the desert floor. This was the geometry of silence. I realized this wasn't just a place of offering. It was a machine, a device. And the tree was its power source, the offerings its components. As I stared, mesmerized by the impossible precision of the pattern, I heard a new sound. A soft, rhythmic click-clack. It was coming from the direction of the split rock, the entrance. Someone or something was coming. I ducked behind a large boulder, peering around the edge. A figure emerged from the passage of the split rock. It was a man dressed in the dusty, old-fashioned garb of a 19th-century prospector. He looked lost, confused. He stumbled into the canyon, looking around, his eyes wide. And then from another direction, a second figure appeared. A woman, dressed in modern hiking gear, looking at a map with a panicked expression. Then a third. A small boy, chasing a lizard. One by one they emerged from different points along the canyon wall, all converging on the central clearing. They were the echoes, the memories. But they weren't the waterlogged, indistinct figures Thorne had described in his logbook. These were solid, real. They were perfect reproductions. The desert's library was opening, and it was displaying its collection. They didn't seem to see each other. They each moved in their own bubble of time, their own stolen story. But they were all being drawn inexorably towards the great Joshua tree in the center. And then the listener appeared again. It didn't walk. It was just there. Standing beside the tree, its blank face turned towards the approaching echoes. I watched in horrified fascination as the first echo, the prospector, reached the tree. He fell to his knees, looking up at the branches in awe. The listener reached out its shrouded hand and placed it on the prospector's head. The prospector's form flickered, like a dying light bulb. He became translucent, and I could see the lines of the geometric pattern on the ground through his body. Then, with a soft sigh that sounded like dust settling, he dissolved completely. His pickaxe, which had been at the base of the tree, now glowed with a faint, internal energy for a moment, before fading. It was reabsorbing its memories. It was maintaining its library. But it wasn't just reabsorbing. As the prospector vanished, the listener turned its head and looked directly at me, hiding behind my rock. The voice in my head returned, cold and clear. The collection is old. Stale. We require new stories. Your story. The artist's story. You have seen the process. Now you will be a part of it. A new offering is required. A permanent one. It began to glide towards me. And the other echoes, the hiker, the boy, they all stopped their wandering. And they all turned, their borrowed faces now blank and empty, and they began to walk towards me as well. I was no longer an observer. I was the next acquisition for the library. There is a unique and terrible clarity that comes when you know you are about to die. The world narrows to a single point. For me, that point was the gliding, shrouded figure of the listener and the silent, approaching echoes of the stories it had already consumed. They were coming for me. Not to kill me. to file me, to turn the vibrant, chaotic noise of my life into another neat, quiet offering at the base of their ancient, humming tree. The voice of the listener echoed in my mind, a dry, rustling sound that felt like sand scraping against the inside of my skull. Your story is loud. It is full of the city, full of sharp, discordant emotions. It will be a fine addition to the collection. Panic is a fire. Can consume you or you can use it as fuel. As the faceless thing and its ghostly entourage closed in my engineer's mind, the part of me that Ben had always teased for being too rigid, too logical, kicked into overdrive. I was not a fighter. I was not a survivalist. But I was a problem solver. And this was a problem of physics, of acoustics, of a system that needed to be broken. I remembered Ben's terrified whisper on the voicemail, "The silence is the only place they can't find you if you don't think too loud." And I remembered my own discovery. I had driven the listener back with a fortress of imagined, chaotic, human noise. Noise was the weapon. Silence was their world. I had to shatter their world. I didn't run. Instead, I did the most counterintuitive thing possible. I stood my ground, pulled the highly sensitive audio recorder from my pack, and cranked the input gain to maximum. Then I aimed the directional microphone not at the approaching creatures, but at my own throat. I took a deep breath, and I began to tell a story. My name is Alexander Vance. I shouted, my voice raw and loud. A profane intrusion into the sacred quiet of the canyon. I was born on a Tuesday in a city of 10 million people. The first sound I ever heard was a hospital siren. The listener flinched. The echoes hesitated, their movements becoming jerky and uncertain. The voice in my head hissed, "The noise, it is unstructured, painful." My first memory is not of a quiet stream or a silent forest. I roared, projecting my voice, my story, my noise with all the force I could muster. It's of the sound of 1,000 car horns on the freeway. It's the sound of my mother shouting my name across a crowded playground. It's the sound of a rock concert so loud it made my teeth vibrate. I was weaponizing my life. I was taking the chaotic, beautiful, messy narrative of a human existence and turning it into a sonic assault. I described the screech of subway trains, the roar of a jet plane overhead, the chaotic, overlapping chatter of 1,000 people in a crowded market. I described everything that was the antithesis of this place. The echoes began to flicker. The woman in the hiking gear, her form wavered, became translucent. The little boy chasing the lizard dissolved into a cloud of shimmering dust. My noise, my story was overriding their own. It was a data conflict, a denial of service attack on their reality. The listener, however, was stronger. It let out a silent, furious scream that I felt as a wave of intense vertigo. The ground seemed to tilt. The geometric patterns on the sand began to glow with a sickly purple light. Your single story is not enough, the voice in my head snarled. The library is vast. Your noise will be absorbed. It was right. I was just one man. My voice would eventually give out. My memories would be consumed. I needed more noise. I fumbled in my pack with one hand, still shouting my life story, and pulled out my phone and a small, powerful Bluetooth speaker I had brought for emergencies. My hands were shaking, but I managed to power it on, connect it to my phone. I navigated to my music library. It was full of the loud, aggressive, chaotic music Ben and I used to listen to punk rock, industrial metal, electronic music with jarring, unstructured beats. I selected a playlist, cranked the volume to maximum, and hit play. The song that erupted from the small speaker was a violent, chaotic blast of distorted guitars and screaming vocals. In the context of the silent canyon, it was the sound of a world being torn apart. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The remaining echoed the prospector, the woman. They didn't just flicker. They exploded. They burst like soap bubbles, their forms disintegrating with a soft, sighing sound, leaving nothing behind. The listener shrieked, a sound of pure agony that was both silent and deafeningly loud inside my mind. It staggered back, its shrouded form writhing. The geometric patterns on the ground flared with the blinding, purple light, and the great Joshua tree in the center began to vibrate violently. The voice in my head was no longer coherent. It was a jumble of static of 100 different stolen voices all crying out in pain at once. The pattern is broken, the geometry collapses, too much noise. The listener's form began to unravel. The burial shrouds fell away, revealing not a body, but a swirling vortex of pure black silence, a hole in the fabric of reality. And from that hole I could feel the pull, the desperate hunger of a collector whose library was being burned to the ground. It wasn't dying. It was retreating. It was collapsing in on itself. I knew I had only seconds. I turned and ran, not looking back. I ran through the passage of the split rock, the impossible silence of it now a welcome relief from the chaos behind me. When I burst out the other side, back into the normal desert, the sound from the canyon was cut off as if a door had been slammed shut. I didn't stop running. I ran until I found the main trail. I ran until the sun began to set. I ran until my legs were jelly and my throat was raw. I made it back to my truck in the dead of night, guided only by the stars and the memory of my GPS coordinates. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and my mind felt scoured. The drive back to the city was a blur. When I finally stumbled into my apartment, I was a different person than the one who had left. The official search for Ben was quietly closed a week later. The official cause remains death by exposure. They never found a body. Of course they didn't. There was no body to find. He hadn't died. He had been edited. His story had been added to a collection, his essence powering a silent, geometric machine in the heart of a desert that was not as empty as it seemed. I have tried to return to my life of logic and numbers. But it's impossible. The world feels different now. I am acutely aware of the quiet moments, the silences between sounds. And in those moments I can sometimes feel it. A faint, distant hum. The echo of a system trying to reboot. And there is the matter of the toll. I had won. I had escaped. But the victory was not clean. In the aftermath, I began to notice the gaps. I had fought the listener with my memories, my stories. And in the battle, some of them had been damaged, corrupted. I can remember the facts of my childhood car accident, but I can no longer feel the terror. I can remember the image of my mother in the hospital, but the profound grief, the feeling of it is just a hollow space. The listener didn't just want happy memories. It wanted any memory with a strong emotional charge. It wanted the high-energy data points. And I had thrown them at it like grenades. I saved myself, but I sacrificed pieces of the story that made me who I was. I still have the audio recording from that day in the canyon. I have the sound of my own frantic, shouted story. I have the distorted blast of the music. And I have the sound of the entity's psychic scream as its world collapsed. I listen to it sometimes, not to remember the fear, but to remind myself that the recording exists, that it was real. Because sometimes in the dead of night, when the city noise dies down to a low hum, I start to wonder if the silence I feel is my own, or if it's just the desert patiently, quietly listening for me to forget the noise, so it can come back and finish the story. Thank you for receiving this transmission from the Wilderness Protocol. There are entities in this world that do not feed on flesh and blood. They feed on experience, on the very narrative of our lives. They are the silent archivists of our joys and our sorrows. Be careful what stories you tell in the quiet places. You may find an audience you did not intend. If this report has proven valuable and you wish to remain on the distribution list for future warnings, please consider liking this video and subscribing. In a world full of noise, it is the silences you should fear the most.